Mike. I'm just up here to introduce some people, but I thought I'd just make a couple of comments about my personal life and what Marbon Chemical meant to me. I went to work for Marbon in 1959 in the Physical Testing and Analytical Lab, reporting to Bill Sexton and Jose Cash and Frank Furno, if you remember that name. I'm probably one of the few guys who ever worked for three major chemical companies, but everything I learned at Marbon enabled me to get to where I am today, wherever that is. You learn things like linear coefficient of thermal expansion, tensile modulus, tensile strength, heat distortion properties, and so forth. Those values that I got from that experience enabled me to get, I've had my own company now for 30 years, and in that company, which is a compounding company, everything that I've learned at Marbon is implemented there. Not only that, comparing it to other major chemical companies, what company would pay for a 4-year college education? They did for me. You can't compare the other companies with, big major companies. U.S. Rubber, who had a product called Cryolastic ABS. You remember that? And U.S. Steel. So, immeasurably, this company is so unusual and so great that I was just very proud to be a part of it. Now, at this time, I'd like to introduce Paul Hoblitzell.
I'm kind of wearing two hats today. I want to thank Marbon. I came to work in '61. Marbon gave you responsibility and empowered you so you could do your job. And I was in California, Ottawa, Australia, and here at Woodmarble. And they taught me much of what I know also. I'm happy Marbon Borg Warner has put an exhibit on our second floor to help remember what they did down there with ABS plastics, etc. We're glad that they can join other companies that had manufacturing here, Acme Fishing Tool, Parkersburg Bottling, Parkersburg Rig and Reel, Porcelain Products, Union Insulating, and many others. That is the part of our oil and gas and industrial museum. And we're glad to have you. Thank you.
Ralph Chambers.
Prez. Well, here comes Prez.
I'm, for reasons I don't think I fully understood, I'm a president of this organization. Probably because I was the only guy silly enough to not to avoid it. But about a year and a half ago, when Sabic Industries announced that they were closing the what we used to call at Borg Warner the Woodmar site, it was really a sad event. When you count it up to the present time, that manufacturing site had a 58-year run, which is pretty impressive for the chemical industry. The main thing about working for Borg Warner was it was a lot more than just a job, and most of the people who were there any length of time understand that. It wasn't a job, it was an experience. Corporations make mistakes all the time, change direction, correct problems, and move on. And Borg Warner they were no different than anyone else, and they made their share of mistakes. But the one constant that was there all the time was integrity. Never changed. And it was from the top down, and you learned it. But when Sabic announced that they were going to close the site, part of the sadness was they're not just closing it, they're going to dismantle the whole thing right down to ground level and create a nice clean site to hopefully build a new cracking plant on someday. I hope they get it. But anyway, when this announcement was made that it was going to be closed, I got a phone call from Tom Wiseman, and he said, we need to get together and discuss this. And I said, discuss what? And he said, we got to do something about this. I said, do what? And he said, I think we need to start a museum. And I'm thinking, man, this is ridiculous. But okay, I'll sit down. Well, anyway, Tom got about a dozen or so people together, and we started talking about, what do you do? Well, we build a museum. You know, I'm keep thinking, you know, we got no money, absolutely zip. To start a museum, you need some artifacts. We didn't have any. We needed money. If you got artifacts, you have to have a place to display them. We didn't have a place to display them. It's just ridiculous. We talked about this for, I don't know, a bunch of meetings, half a dozen. And the crazy thing was, after a while, it started making sense. And it started coming together. And, you know, I'm looking around thinking, you know, is this really making sense, or should we all just be locked up in a rubber room someplace? But it slowly started taking shape. And essentially we had a dozen guys in a room who didn't have any idea what they were doing or where they were going, but it started taking shape. And we filed for tax exempt status at the state and the federal government. We have applied for 501c status, which means anyone who donates money can use it as a tax deduction. We didn't have a place to display anything. Oil and Gas Museum came to our rescue there and very generously offered us a site to put our first display. Surprisingly enough, some of the best support came from SABIC. A lot of you probably knew Scott Dancy, who was with Borg Warner and then General Electric, and was the final plant manager at SABIC. And Scott was absolutely 100% behind what we were doing. And what they'd done with the Parkersburg or the Washington site was they set out everything that was there, and they invited all of the SABIC industry personnel to come by and look at what was in Parkersburg. And if you guys want anything, you can use it in your own labs everywhere else in the country. Come and get it. And they pretty much picked over a lot of the hardware. What was left, Scott Dancy said it was his to do with as he pleased. And he could give it away, he could sell it, and we asked for everything he could afford to give us, and he let us pick through everything that was left. And it's a surprising amount of good hardware that someday might make a nice display in a bigger site. But Scott assigned a SABIC employee, Pat Winsel, who was a Borg Warner guy, and Pat just went out of his way to help us set stuff aside, hid stuff for us, locked it away. Big help. But the end result was, some of you may have seen the display up on the second floor, and it's a small display, but we've got literally an 18-wheeler worth of stuff buried in a site in South Parkersburg for display elsewhere someday. So there's a lot there for the future. But the people behind this thing, Tom Wiseman got it started. I think Tom's a little flaky around the edges sometimes, but it was Tom who drove this thing all the way. He wouldn't let up. Once he got his claws in someone, he wouldn't let him loose. He had a long list of names and a bunch of phone numbers that he started calling, and he made an impression on a bunch of people. And I think it's Tom that really drove this thing and made it possible, because I don't believe anyone else would have stuck with it as well as he did. And then we had a couple of the heavy lifters who put these displays together, did a lot, took stuff apart at the Woodmar site, and that was Pat Winsel and Bruce Hissam. It's a start. It's a fairly humble start right now, but it has possibilities, and with a lot of support from ex-Borg Warner guys like you, hopefully it'll work well. Thanks.
Thank you, Ralph. Before I introduce the next speaker, I almost forgot to mention a man's name who is probably more important for the development of CycleAct than any individual, and that's Howard Irvin. And he sends his regards. He would like to be here, but he's 96 years old. And but his brain is still as crisp and sharp as ever. As sharp, I suppose his tongue still pretty sharp. But he recently wrote a book that's very interesting on how that came about with the development of Cyclac. From cyclicized rubber, wouldn't flows like cement. And there's only one company that had a need for that, and that was at that time U.S. Rubber. And they were actually made the first ABS. Bob Shattuck, in the book, he mentions that Bob Shattuck asked him, wouldn't it be nice if we could get this stuff to injection mold? And that's what Howard did, and he came up with Cyclac T. But anyway, he sends his regards and wishes he could be here. His book, in which there's a copy in the display, is called People, Places, and Tough Plastic. And he didn't pull any punches about people, I tell you right now, and some of them who you know, but it's a good read, and you can get that for $7 on ebook on Amazon. So you read it on your computer, I guess. At this time, I'd like to introduce Bob Hoy.